Johnson County Library is now fine-free. Find out more at jocolibrary.org/fine-free.
The e-resource of this episode is BrainFuse, homework help. BrainFuse Help Now has several ways to get homework help. Live tutoring, writing lab to get feedback within 1 business day, Skill Surfer for study resources and test prep, Send Question to get a response within 1 business day, plus several more tools to collaborate and learn using the website or mobile app.
It is about how trees can communicate with each other through their root systems and how they're actually far more sentient than we give them credit for or we ever even realized. And what blew my mind the most was not only can they communicate with each other, but they are not communicating with just their own type of tree. The entire forest is talking to each other.
Joco Library Uncovered.
Hi, Charles.
Hey, Dave.
Did you know that fleas can jump 130 times their height?
That's a fun fact.
Yeah, for sure. And here's another one. Spiders could eat all the humans on Earth in 1 year because there are 3 million spiders for every 1 human. And they love meat. But no spider that we are aware of, at least, has ever declared an intention to eat a bunch of people. Thankfully.
Yeah, weird.
More than half of your body is bacteria because human cells make up only 43% of the body's total cell count. The rest are bacteria, viruses, and fungi. The greatest amount of these microbes are in our bowels.
Wild.
Yeah. And did you know that feldspar is the most common mineral on Earth? Feldspar is a group of tectosilicate minerals that form rocks and make up 41% of the Earth's crust. Plus, it's fun to say. Feldspar.
That's wonderful.
You said it. Why did we start this episode with those amazing science facts? Well, because it's our fun, weird, wild, and wonderful science collection deep dive episode.
That's right. And our Reader's Advisory librarians are back.
And they've donned white lab coats and they put on their safety glasses so they don't get blinded by science. It's exciting stuff, and it's next. But first,
Library News.
And welcome back to our collection deep dive. And I'm happy to see Gregg is back here again. Welcome, Gregg.
Charles, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be back.
Yeah, and it looks like you brought some guests with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what today's collection deep dive topic is and who you have with you?
Absolutely. And I am excited about today's deep dive because as a Reader's Advisory librarian, I normally deal with fiction. You know, science fiction, romances, thrillers, mysteries, those types of things. But today we are going to be talking about nonfiction and specifically science and nature. So I'm going to be learning about a lot of books that I'm going to be excited about too. But before we begin, I do want to remind everyone that the books that we talk about today will be compiled into a list and be available either in the show notes or online at jocolibrary.org/uncovered. But before we begin, let's go around the room and introduce the librarians who are going to be telling us about these awesome books. Wendy.
Hi, I'm also very excited to be included in the conversation today. I'm Wendy Gish. I'm at the Lenexa Library.
And I am Caitlyn Perkins, and I hail from the Corinth branch in Prairie Village.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Caitlyn, let's go ahead and get us, and you can kick us off by telling us what about today's topic really compels you and draws you in and might draw our readers in.
Yeah, thanks, Gregg. So for those of you who are maybe theater kids in high school or who are into the forensics, and I mean forensics as in competitive speaking and acting, not forensic science, I like to think of today's books as long-winded information speeches, informatives. So they are super niche, specific topics that have been really fleshed out. One of my coworkers called them microhistories, and that's kind of a good way of looking at it. But it doesn't have to just be about history. It can really be about anything. It could be economics, or it could be pop culture, or it could be as in today's science books. So these are scholarly researched books, but that read like you're talking to a friend. They're very conversational, readable, and accessible to the general audience.
And also books that'll be good for book groups or book clubs.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm super excited. Let's go ahead and get started. What's your first pick? What's the first book that you want to talk to us about today?
So the first one I'm going to start with is by an author who many of you probably already know. Bill Bryson has written a lot of great history books and books that talk about like the history of all the objects in your house. And the one I think he's most well known for is A Brief History of Everything. But he wrote a book right before the pandemic hit that came out in 2019 called The Body, A Guide for Occupants. And many of you may have missed it given the timing at which it was released. And this is such a good one. In true to nature for Bill Bryson, it reads with these perfect little comedic nuggets thrown in throughout the whole thing, So let me backtrack. Bill Bryson is kind of known for his ability to synthesize a ton of information into a concise, easy to read, easy to digest little edition. And so one reviewer wrote that he gleans as much as possible from as little as possible with Bill Bryson.
That's great. And I remember reading him back in the 90s about a book about linguistics. So he's been around for a while and has a really deep catalog to pull from.
Yeah, so in this one, again, the title is The Body, A Guide for Occupants. Bill Bryson theoretically kind of dissects the human body, and chapter by chapter he goes on different topics like from the brain to your skin to your gut, and he tells you a ton of information, but you don't actually feel like you're learning. I feel like if biology classes in school could teach out of Bill Bryson's book, you would have way more people flocking to biology and probably to medicine also, and probably passing the courses too, because again, you just don't feel like you're learning, but you're absorbing all of the things he's saying.
So like a biology professor sitting down to you, next to you, and over a cup of coffee and chatting about this rather than just a scholarly academic tone.
Exactly. And he makes a lot of comparisons that don't even feel like they're even science. So at one point he talks about how if you were to break down the body into your actual compounds like nitrogen and oxygen and carbon, how you could go out and you could buy all of those pieces and make a human. And it would only cost 200 pounds or something if you were to compile based on what we are physically made out of.
That is fascinating. So aside from The Body, what other books did you want to tell us about today? What's your next selection?
So my next one is a little bit more on the nature and plant life side as opposed to the human and physical side. So it is called The Drunken Botanist, The Plants That Create the World's Greatest Drinks, and it's by Amy Stewart. This one is actually a little bit older. It came out in 2013, but I don't think it's very well known, and it is so fun. I am not actually a big drinker myself, but this tells you about the art of making adult beverages and kind of the history behind how we found that if you fermented this plant or if you added this animal to the fermented liquid that you have, that you are all of a sudden going to have this entirely different, tasty drink.
That's fascinating. And it sounds like it's not just one long narrative that is broken up into kind of different digestible, if you don't mind me saying that, parts, right?
You got it. Exactly. So if you're only interested in, let's say, learning about gin or learning about tequila or hard cider, then you can jump to just those specific sections. That's one of my favorite things about nonfiction is that you don't actually have to read the entire thing. You can pick and choose what you want. There is not a building climax. It's very easy to pick the parts that are of interest to you.
That's great. So something if you're an audiobook listener and just kind of want to read this on the run, maybe going through workouts or going to work, you can kind of stop and start and jump in wherever, whatever it takes you.
Yeah, or if you want to just read a chapter before bed, or if you've got small children and you know you only have 10 minutes before you're going to pass out at night.
Absolutely. Well, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for telling us about that. Now, Wendy, to switch to you, I believe one of your picks kind of goes along these same lines, right?
Yeah, the next book that would follow that one is Your Mind on Plants by Michael Pollan. It's written in true popular science style. I found it to be a page turner, but also, like Caitlyn just mentioned, you can read it in sections. He actually divides it into 3 sections. The first one is opium, and then he talks about caffeine, and finally mescaline. And it's some of the stuff is really surprising. Like for example, caffeine. You know, everybody drinks caffeine, but they don't really think about it as being a drug.
Yeah, or how it actually affects the human body.
Right. And so he talks about the fact that we give that to children. For example, you know, soda, caffeine, things like that. So it's a very socially accepted drug. And then a lot about the coffee industry, which really changed the way commerce and industry was conducted, and really the way that people went to work. Prior to like coffee breaks, they had beer breaks, for example. So it's a really interesting book, and you can definitely read it in different sections. You don't really have to read it all the way through. I love one of the things that he brings up also in the book regarding coffee plants is, and I'm going to read a quote if that's okay.
Okay, absolutely. Please do.
So he says that the interesting question is why so many of the defense chemicals produced by plants are psychoactive in animals at less than lethal doses. One theory holds that the plant doesn't necessarily want to kill its predator, only disarm it. So it's really interesting because they've done experiments with bees, for example, where they give them a whiff of like what they would be pollinating with a coffee plant, and they find that it brings them back. They prefer that, but it doesn't kill them, so they don't destroy the plant. So it's just little tidbits like that I find really interesting.
How the biology of the plant evolved to kind of live alongside people, animals, those types of things, and to kind of become useful by evolving.
And do we cultivate coffee, or does coffee cultivate us?
When it comes to my morning cup, I know who's cultivating whom.
Right,
trust me.
exactly.
Yes.
And he does an experiment in the book where he tries to give up caffeine, tries to give up his morning beverage, and it's just this series of sort of fumbling around and not having the mental capacity to finish his book, for example, or articles. It's really, really interesting.
Absolutely. And unlike the Bill Bryson book, Michael Pollan has a kind of a deep bench. He definitely has some other readable books as well.
Very, very good in popular science. So.
That's fascinating. Can you tell us about another book that you would like to recommend today?
So going back to early America, Victoria Johnson does a book called American Eden, David Hossick, Botany and Medicine in the Garden of the Early Republic. So she describes him. I think this book is cataloged really under botany, but it really is more of a biography. It really follows his journey from infant to adulthood and his goals of establishing the first American botanic garden. What
was this gentleman's name again?
David Hossick.
So he was around during Revolutionary War.
He was born. He was old enough to watch George Washington march down. I can't remember what the street was right after the Revolutionary War in
fabulous.
Victory. So he had a memory of that. But
he knew founding fathers like Alexander Hamilton, Burr, Jefferson.
Yeah, he was the attending physician at the Burr-Hamilton duel. And so he was the personal physician for Alexander Hamilton, but then was also a good, close personal friend of Burr. So he had an invested interest in that for sure. And that's something interesting that this author does. She talks a lot about the importance of botany at the time. So they were starting to move away more from, dosing people with mercury or bleeding them and using plant-based remedies. And so he was really he had a lot of foresight, in what he was doing. And so he wanted to create this garden. It's called Elgin Gardens in New York. And it's actually where 30 Rockefeller Plaza is right now.
Oh, yeah?
So, yeah. So anyway, he just wanted to have these plants benefit
So it's fascinating. So it's kind of a combination of history, biography, and popular science all at the same time.
Yeah, if you like American history, history of medicine, or any of that stuff, you'd probably enjoy this
Absolutely.
book.
Even though he probably didn't make the musical, he was still an important part of that experience.
Yeah, he would know the words.
Okay, there we are. So that's fascinating. Thank you so much. Now, Caitlyn, let's go back to you. What is one of the other books that you wanted to talk about today?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So the next one that I'm going to be talking about also is kind of an interplay between history and memoir and science. It's called The Lost Family, How DNA Testing is Upending Who We Are, and it's by Libby Copeland. And this one also came out during the pandemic. It actually came out March 2020, so right as we went into lockdown.
Yes.
It is the story of ancestry testing. And so how many of us have kind of just casually been given a 23andMe or an Ancestry, cheek swabbing or spit test as a Christmas present? It's a great gift for those people that you don't know what to get. So many of us have taken these tests and gone into it so lightly, and then all of a sudden there's this growing population of people who have found that their dad is not their dad, or they have siblings out there that they never knew. And it's their stories intertwined with the history of how these tests work and the science of how they work, whether it's looking at the Y chromosome or the X chromosome, because Ancestry actually uses a different technique than 23andMe, even though they kind of give you what you feel like is the same information. They're actually using two completely different scientific methods.
And also, it sounds like whenever I hear about, like DNA tests, I always think of it in terms of like, those police TV shows where they have forensic. Does that tie into that at all as well?
At the end, they talk a little bit about how there has been police seizing of this information, and we kind of think of the Golden State Killer, because that's one that was really publicized, how they used DNA testing to solve that long unsolved mystery, unsolved crime. And so they do dive into that a little bit, but mostly it's about the personal stories of the people and the science of how this testing works.
Fascinating. And what was the title of that one again?
Yeah, it's The Lost Family, How DNA Testing is Upending Who We Are by Libby Copeland.
That's great. What's the next one that you wanted to talk about today?
My next one is Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest by Suzanne Simard. And this one came out in 2021, so it's fairly new. We just did this one for the Corinth Book Group, and it was a great discussion. It is about how trees can communicate with each other through their root systems, and how they're actually far more sentient than we give them credit for or we ever even realized. And what blew my mind the most was not only can they communicate with each other, but they are not communicating with just their own type of tree. They are, the entire forest is talking to each other.
Really?
And they're existing in this symbiotic relationship. When Suzanne Simard started her research, the predominant line of thinking in the field was that plants are in competition with each other, and that they're all competing for the water and for the sunlight. But when she started doing her tests, she discovered that they're actually working together. So the trees that shade the forest, preventing the other trees from getting any light, are then giving their extra nutrients to the smaller ones to make it so that they can all survive together. And then when those smaller ones are producing the most of nitrogen or whatever, they then give it back to the bigger trees.
Fascinating.
It's incredibly fascinating, and it just leaves you with that feel-good feeling of we're in this together.
Absolutely, and book group friendly, as you said.
Very. So it's also part memoir. It bounces back and forth between talking about Simard's struggle with being a female in the field, and also she gets cancer at one point, and it's definitely tied to a lot of the poisons that she was having to use in her forestry work. Finding her husband and having a child, and trying to figure out that balance between being a researcher and also being a human.
Absolutely, yeah. Wendy, let's just switch back to you. What's the next book on your list?
Mine is Sound of a Wild Snail Eating, and it's by Elizabeth Tova Bailey. So in this one, it's very similar that she's struck by a mysterious illness, and then she does a lot of research. So around having sort of observing a snail that a friend brings in inadvertently on a pot of violets. So, and while she's convalescing, she doesn't have the energy or wherewithal to really do anything other than lay there. So she ends up observing the snail at a much slower pace than she would have normally. She would probably been out doing stuff like romping through the woods with her dog and things like that. So she found that time changed for her. She talks about the fact that she matched the snail's pace, but she also did a lot of research into just snails, really. Like you wouldn't, I guess you walk by them all the time and you don't really think about them as being that complex, but people have been doing research on them for centuries, which actually surprised me. And they were they're very sentient, like you were talking about to some degree. They have like romance. They're snail romance.
Really?
Yeah, and they have little love darts, in fact. So it's really cute. But I also read this during for the first time during the pandemic. And it struck me that it was on a grander scale that everyone had slowed down. Like with being kept at home, people were outside more, people were observing nature more. So I found there was a lot of parallels with what I was experiencing and what she had observed. And then I also have a snail joke. So
okay.
So what would a snail want with a smartphone?
What would a snail want with a smartphone?
It takes a lot of shelfies. Yeah. But anyway, really, one more really quick thing about that one. If you're interested in snails, there's a guy named Timothy Pierce who's a malacologist.
Yeah.
And he works with the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. He's referenced in the book, and you can also follow him on social media. So It's actually really interesting.
So The Sound of a Wild Snail seems like it's a combination of almost philosophy as well as a scientific look at those things that are in your garden.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what makes it a charming book. I haven't met somebody yet who hasn't liked that book.
And that's another book group type of book, correct?
That is. We will be reading that one soon.
Okay. And let's go ahead and finish this up. What's the last book that you'd like to talk about today?
The last one is called Endless Forms, The Secret World of Wasps. And I think that wasps have been set in a villain capacity. And this book really opens your eyes to the fact that they're necessary as pollinators and predators. They keep pests down. And I have a trivia question about this one.
Oh.
So let's see. Are wasps or bees older? I'm going to have you both guess.
I'm going to say bees.
Well, just for the sake of being argumentative, I'm going to say wasps.
So wasps are 100 million years older than bees.
Really?
Yeah, and there's 22,000 species of bees, and there are over 100,000 species of wasps. But because bees are so soft and cuddly, there's been a lot more research done on bees. So you learn a lot about this book, and you have a new appreciation for things that we see every day, much like the snails.
That's absolutely fascinating. So they're not just those annoying things in our backyard. They actually serve a purpose in nature.
Yeah, like there'd be a lot of icky things that, reproduced rather rapidly if it wasn't for the wasps. They're pretty cool. And one more really quick thing about wasps is that, so another quote from the book is, bees are simply wasps that have forgotten how to hunt. The original bee was a solitary wasp who turned into a vegetarian. Yeah.
That sounds like a fascinating book. And you kind of mentioned earlier with The Sound of a Wild Snail that the Johnson County Library has a book group that's kind of focused on these types of topics.
Yeah, we just started a book group for nonfiction in 2023. It's at the Lenexa Library. You can check the catalog for the times and the selections.
And what's it called?
It's called In Pursuit of Science and Nature.
And this is something that's free to
register? You can you get a book for free when you sign up, and we have a lot of people who've come that are very interested in this topic and have a lot of interesting information to share themselves.
Great. So it's not only a book discussion group, but it's also just kind of a science and nature discussion group.
It's for people who are curious about the natural world. I would say that anybody who has a curiosity about science and nature, they should definitely come visit us.
Great. Well, if anybody out there who might be interested, go to our website for more information. But as we wrap up today, I want to tell you all about a book that I've been looking forward to. This book is called What an Owl Knows by Jennifer Ackerman. It comes out in June 13th, 2023, so make sure to get your holds in now. This Jennifer Ackerman is an author who wrote The Genius of Birds and some other types of very well-reviewed books. But this one is about owls and kind of a combination of their history throughout humanity culture, what they've represented in different cultures throughout the world. Also, the field work that she did with some owl experts, and also her own personal memoirs as well. So it's kind of a good combination between that history, that field work, and that history and culture part of it. This is going to be a good book group book, and hopefully everyone out there is going to be excited about it.
I'm excited about it.
Oh, okay, good. Wendy is in. Well, I really want to thank everyone out there for listening and you all for joining us today. I really hope you enjoyed some of our books.
Oh, super fun. Thank you.
Thanks for including me.
And a reminder that if you want a list of all the books that we talked about today, either look in the show notes or go to jocolibrary.org/uncovered.
Joco Library Uncovered will be right back.
We live in a society exquisitely dependent on science and technology, in which hardly anyone knows anything about science and technology. Carl Sagan. The saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. Isaac Asimov. Those are two really great quotations, and it reminds me of why the library is so important. You know, books like the ones that Gregg, Caitlyn, and Wendy discussed, and countless others that are in our collection, are here for you to learn and explore fun, weird, wild, and wonderful science. Well, let's talk about our next episode. In June, we're back with another episode, and this time we go behind the scenes of our incarcerated services. Charles, incarcerated services librarian Melody Kinnaman, and I sat down with two residents, Phil and Dia, at the Adult Detention Center in New Century, Kansas. They share how the library is part of their rehabilitation and their relationship with books. Before we leave you, we're always interested in hearing what you have to say. It's time for a short segment we call
What You Thinking?
This episode's What You Thinking is a little different. Sometimes we read you 5-star reviews that we receive. Sometimes we present audio that we've recorded from our patrons and librarians responding to some question that we posed. But this time around, we're asking you to visit our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/JocoLibrary. There, you will find a prompt asking you to share your favorite fun, weird, wild, or wonderful science book. Be sure to explain why it's fun, weird, wild, or wonderful. We can't wait to hear your responses.
Joco Library Uncovered.
If you enjoyed today's topics, you might be interested in these recommendations from our collection. First, a Charles choice. American Serengeti by Dan Flores. Bison, horses, coyotes, wolves, grizzly bears, pronghorns. Noted Western and environmental historian Flores dazzles with his vivid, informed, and richly detailed essays on 6 iconic animals of the American Great Plains. Next, a Dave's double feature. And so if you go to Kanopy, just visit the streaming section of our e-library. That's jocolibrary.org/e-library. My first pick is Super Size Me, the fast food industry in America. Now, this one was from 2004, and it's about an hour and 30 minutes long. It was Oscar nominated, and Moreland Spurlock had a social experiment in fast food gastronomy, and you see him attempting to subsist uniquely on food from McDonald's for an entire month. Now, that is truly fun, weird, wild, wonderful science. And my second pick for my Dave's double feature is NOVA Universe Revealed, the Milky Way, 2021, and it's under an hour. And it's described as, across the night sky, the Milky Way reminds us of our place in the galaxy we call home. But what shaped this giant spiral of stars, and what will be its destiny? Travel back in time to unlock the turbulent story of our cosmic neighborhood. Now, I'd like to remind you that a full list of our book report recommendations, including everything that Gregg and Wendy and Caitlyn talked about today, can be found on our webpage. That's jocolibrary.org/uncovered.
Joco Library Uncovered is a production of Johnson County Library and is recorded at the Central Resource Library in Overland Park, Kansas. We would love to read your thoughtful emails at uncovered@jocolibrary.org. Join our online conversation at facebook.com/Joco Library. Look for us on Twitter at Joco Library. Our website is jocolibrary.org. Subscribe to Joco Library Uncovered through your favorite podcatcher or go to jocolibrary.podbean.com. Thanks for listening, and come back in 2 weeks for more Joco Library Uncovered.